Everyone, I am Dr. Vernita White. I am a strategic transformational coach. I am also the CEO and founder of Glenn White Global Solutions, which is a high-level training and development company where we work with high-level professional individuals or their teams or organizations, and we help them to bring practical applications to complex situations. And we do that in a variety of ways by speaking, coaching, consulting, having books, all sorts of things. And the bottom line really is to help those individuals break their personal glass ceilings so they can become more powerful professionally as individuals and together as a team. So I decided to do something new. I decided to do something new. I got the idea and I wanted to share this with a lot of people. I had this thought of sharing the evolution of my career. Some people don't know what I've done prior to me being on social media and wanting to transition to being a coach, a speaker, and an author, which really isn't too far from what I did over the years. I just had no idea I was really being prepped and trained to go in this direction. And I had this idea, I'm gonna call it a divine download, where I was looking at my CV or curriculum vitae, which is an extended resume essentially. And I realized how much work I've actually done in my career for conferences, articles, applying for grants, teaching, and just other different activities that I've done in the community. And I was like, the people who attended those conferences, while it was great, sometimes they were small groups, sometimes they were large groups. But then it's like after the conference was over, who really was people say they were gonna follow up, or people said, oh, let me get a copy of your presentation. But I felt that nothing was changing, right? And then it's like, as I continued and evolved, what about, I didn't have a way of showing people, like putting the information out there. That's really what I want to say. So during the evolution of my career, I wanted to give my CV life, like bring it to life, because I didn't think about this back in the day to where to record my presentations so that I could just upload them to YouTube or some other site, or to just re-record myself like I'm doing now. And I am going to show the exact presentations that I've done. I'm not altering or changing anything. And then in between, I'll share like my commentary of where my mind was then and then my perspective now, because I've seen so much and I've grown over time. I looked at my presentations from my CV. We started in 2013, and at the time of this recording, it is much years later. But I wanted to start there because that's where I really started not really owning my voice. I didn't start that then, but that's really where I started putting out my knowledge outside of being a classroom teacher. And I remember being a classroom teacher, looking at textbooks, looking at articles. When the school or the district was sending us to conferences, I would look at these people like, oh my gosh, they're presenting. Oh my gosh, they're on stage. They must be so amazing. And who knew all those years later, when I started my PhD program, I would learn and later become one of those people. So this is fun. A lot of this is like old information, but I did a post on my Instagram and my TikTok. I think on my business Facebook page as well. All of those are at Dr. Vernita White, some sort of variation of that, by the way. And I said, I think I said something about one woman's old knowledge is another person's treasure, or something like that. Because you know how one man's trash is another man's treasure. But my stuff wasn't trash, but I don't use this information too much anymore. I don't study a lot of this information too much. But then I just started thinking like, someone may get some benefit out of it. And I've always been big on taking things out of the ivory tower and putting them out there to the world. And I thought I was doing that by doing these conferences and writing articles, but there were still people who were like, I really don't know what you do. So the first one I'm going to do, I have my whole list here. And we're going to do one presentation kind of at a time. And these intros may not be too long, but I never know where people are going to pick up and start watching. So this is the first presentation. Excuse me. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I'm back. See, this is going to be fun. And I remember doing these presentations live. I have to look at my CV to know where I was in October for the Florida Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And I was up there so formal, so stiff, and presenting and, thinking I'm doing something. And at the time I probably was. So this is just going to be lighthearted because I've grown since then. And I just wanted to have fun, especially when we're talking about something like mathematics. So I am going to read the screen. This is not to insult your intelligence, but if you're like me, if I'm listening to something or a presentation, I technically don't have to be on the screen. I may have on my earpods or earbuds, or I may have the volume up really high and doing things, out and about. I know some people get offended. It's like, how are you really paying attention? Well, I pay attention that way. I didn't think I was an auditory person, but when it comes to just, information like this, I am an auditory person. But feel free to take notes if you want, but I just wanted to caution you ahead of time. I will be reading for that purpose. So not to insult your intelligence, but I wanted to make sure that I get the point across. The other thing is, again, this was back in 2013, and I'm not in that same space. So I want to make sure that I am, giving the presentation is justice, right? Note, if you were live with me, I never read the screens like that. I understand that people like to take pictures of screens and write notes, so I do that, but I don't read my screens. And then I've gotten to the point where I use graphics and I know everything, so there's less words. And then sometimes I can do a lot of talks and presentations with nothing, so check me out. But anyway, all right. Do I have curriculum content knowledge for Common Core? Again, look at the date and then look at the time that you're watching this. People have their thoughts about Common Core. Common Core may not be around where you are. Common Core, we'll talk about it. So just keep an open mind. So the agenda, introduction. Hi, I gave you that in the beginning, but again, I am Dr. Vernita Glenn White. I go by Dr. V, and I used to be a K-12 mathematics teacher. I'm an academic instructional coach, a district specialist. I went on to work with the School Transformation Office for one of the largest school districts in the country, and I was a college professor. I'm transitioning to a strategic coach, to where I want to help high professionals in the education industry, as well as those who are also in any form of training and development. So people who do workshops, teachers, leaders, and things like that. Anyone who imparts knowledge and want to get better, we work on some things. All right, so that's me. So then what is curriculum content knowledge? We're going to talk about that. Brief overview of Common Core state standards for mathematics. Brief overview of standards for mathematics practices. I think it's mathematical practices. Assessing your curriculum content knowledge. Identify the standards. Discuss a task, and closure. I didn't change any of this. Like I said, this is just where I was in 2013. This was my this is my second year in my PhD program. Yeah, because I went in August of 2012. So yeah, this was year 2. All right, brief background. General pedagogical knowledge, subject matter knowledge, and pedagogical content knowledge. I didn't realize that I was so deep into understanding curriculum when I was a K-12 teacher. So I started teaching, I forgot, probably like in 2000, I graduated undergrad in 2005, so 2006, because there was some issues happening. And I started teaching then, and then I was really big in mathematics, so who knew that I was going to be able to grow and do all this stuff? So looking back, I already knew this stuff, but I didn't know that there were actual labels and research to it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this challenge, and I'm not going to keep jumping off on these tangents, is because we don't realize how brilliant we've always been until we look back and then start sharing information with other people. And I don't want you to have to wait 6-7 years to start sharing stuff. just share in the moment and build like a curriculum of a content bank of your stuff, of your information. But anyway, okay, I get excited. All right, so we're going to do some definitions. General pedagogical knowledge refers to important knowledge about teaching, learners, and learning that transcends particular subject matter domains. And I give you a reference from Bray. You'll see the reference at the end of the presentation. What is subject matter knowledge? Refers to knowledge of the discipline of mathematics that is not unique to teaching. For example, important facts, concepts, procedures, and relationships between mathematical ideas. The good thing about this is you can insert any content here or any subject matter here. My background is mathematics, but you can insert science, reading, English language arts, social studies, whatever. Pedagogical content knowledge includes ways of representing and formulating the subject that is comprehensible to others, and an understanding of what makes the learning of specific topics easy or difficult. The notion of curriculum content knowledge was later included into this category by Grossman in 1990, which obviously focuses on knowledge of curriculum and curriculum materials. This was so important to me as I began to study the mathematics at the PhD level, is because most people are afraid of mathematics. There's a big issue in the United States about we're being at the bottom, pretty much at the bottom of the pile of having our students understand mathematics and science. And it's like, as much school as we have, as much education as we have, and free education that we have, it's like, why are people still struggling with mathematics? So I came into the PhD program wanting to understand what was so hard about people learning mathematics and teaching mathematics, because at this time, I had been over a mathematics department as an instructional coach to where I had to help teachers get better. And then I was also a liaison for our principal, who would have to work with the district specialist and even the superintendent at times to understand what was happening with our students at the middle school and high school level. So I was already thrown into the behind the scenes of understanding mathematics and what were the problems, because everything was data driven, like got to get the scores up, got to get the testing scores up. And then I was like, something has happened before we get there. So I just wanted to preface that to like, how did you automatically jump into that? I didn't. It was already in place before I even had the thought of earning a PhD in mathematics and education. All right, curriculum content knowledge. So for example, I asked the participants this question when I was doing this live: how many of you follow a script or a pacing guide? If you're a classroom teacher or you're a traditionally trained educator, meaning in K-12, and you went through a teacher prep program, or even I think some alternative certification programs did this as well, you understand a pacing guide. And it was a document that was handed to you maybe from the district or from your particular school. And it tells you how many sections you're supposed to cover every day, where you should be at the end of 4 weeks, 9 weeks, and so forth. What I did when I worked as an instructional coach, I took it an extra step further and maybe I shouldn't say made, but I strongly requested or suggested that all my teachers use scripts. And scripts were not like scripts that you would read in a play. Scripts, how I used them were, what are the exact questions you're going to use? So a detailed lesson plan. What are the exact questions you're going to use? What problems are you going to teach the students, like examples, practice problems, but not just with the page numbers and not just with the problem, like how did you work it out and what was your actual thought process? What are your steps? Like every question that you give to the students, you should do them yourself. I was like that. I didn't give my students, there were times when I was like, all right, y'all, just do this work right here. But majority, 98% of the time, whatever work I gave my students, I did the problems myself. One, because you weren't going to embarrass me. And two, I needed to understand the pitfalls. And even though I was good at mathematics, I had to say, wait, how would a student get past this if they didn't have certain knowledge? So I would recommend that my teachers do those kind of scripts. And then I asked, how many of you think things should be done differently, but are not quite sure what to do? A lot of teachers were frustrated. New standards were coming out. The state had all of these mandates. Every state pretty much had all of these different mandates. There were some really great teachers in the classroom who knew that things needed to be different, but they were like, we just don't know what to do because we got people telling us to do this over here, but that doesn't work. So all of that. And then I said, how many of you read the teacher's edition? Back in 2013, I used to write for textbooks. People don't know that. I really don't share it that often, but I used to write for textbooks. I used to be on adoption teams. I used to write questions for exams and all of those things. Like, I was deep in this world, right? And I came to love the teacher's edition. Back in the day, like, I'm so old, back in the day, the teacher edition came with like a set of CDs, little round CDs, or they came with a lot of supplemental material in another box. So exam questions, extra enrichment ideas. Each chapter had its own little thing with worksheets and all kind of things. It was just so fascinating to me. And I really started understanding what a curriculum actually was. So I used all of the resources. And I'm looking around my office to see if I had any, but I don't think I have any from my K-12 days. But it was so much fun looking in that teacher's edition. And what I loved about the teacher's edition was all the extra things around the perimeter. So not just reading through the examples and the problems they gave, but what are the additional questions to ask the students? What are some pitfalls the students may have? Like the teacher's editions, like when they were good, they were on point, especially for new teachers or teachers who were shifted to different grade levels or whatever. And I remember this used to frustrate me because there were some teachers who were like, I don't use the textbook. I'm sorry, what? So you just coming in here, just going off the fly, like you just creating up your own problems. And a lot of times it was an ego thing. It was like, okay, so what, you can come up with problems, but all that energy that you spent coming up with problems, you could have been enhancing the problems that were already here and figuring out how to get your students to understand the information. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but I don't know what the teacher's editions look like now. I think a lot of things are digital. A lot of people are getting away from teacher's editions because they can be, some people say they are expensive. But then I was like, if people go to college, what do you think they use? Books. When people do self-help, and this is my new perspective now, when people do self-help, especially in the personal development industry, which got me into wanting to be the coach and bringing personal development and professional development together, people read self-help books, right? Whether it's on a Kindle, a tablet, or the hard copy. So I didn't understand why people were so afraid of books. All right, so brief Common Core information. And I said we're all familiar with how to read the document. I was assuming at that point because that wasn't true. This is about curriculum content knowledge. And I used to know these standards. So standards, if you see on the screen, it has like the name. So it says number and operations in base 10. It has the 3 and then .NBT. That means it's third grade, numbers in base operation in 10. Then it tells you the standard. Then it tells you the cluster then the domain. I knew those for my grade levels, like inside and out. I could walk into a teacher's classroom and if they only had like 3 NBT, so it would be like 3 NBT 2.2, and I would know what that teacher was covering for that day. I know, but that was my job. This was my craft. So I really delved deep into that. So a lot of people just kind of glance over that, but not really reading it. And I remember it's like either some problems were too complex for a certain grade level or they weren't complex enough. And then teachers get upset. Well, I don't know what I'm supposed to be teaching. I'm like, well, did you read the standards, right? So the standards were more than just putting some numbers and, some numbers and letters up there. It gave you guidelines and parameters of what to teach. So the next thing is the standards for mathematical practice. You may see this throughout several presentations. And look at this. You see all of these theatrics that I have in this PowerPoint. It looks so basic compared to what I do now, but that's just where I was. So there are 8 standards for mathematical practice. Number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. 2, reason abstractly and quantitatively. 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. 4, model with mathematics. 5, use appropriate tools strategically. 6, attend to precision. 7, look for and make use of structure. And 8, look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. This was a big part of the Common Core state standards back in the day. And I remember people were like, it was an uproar about having these. But if people understood where standards came from and how they were developed, this was only an adaptation for something that was in place like since 1989, actually. And what the mathematical practice set out to do was to involve students into being mathematicians and learning how to think. Because I could go through this whole thing about the evolution of education and the evolution of mathematics, or even the evolution of STEM, if you want to know that. But this came from, okay, look, we got the time out for kids just doing some problems for the sake of doing problems. We have to start creating people to compete globally. We have to start training our students to be able to not just do mathematics, but understand it. Why are they doing it? How does it apply to them in the world? And then the assessments that would come out, if you remember those were a big deal. They weren't the regular questions. They weren't just the computation questions. These were some deep questions, and it requires students to go through some of this process. And I remember people being upset, and it's like, well, don't be upset at the exam. What you do in the classroom, it shouldn't be 2 different things that are happening. So the standards for mathematical practice set out for students to be more involved in the learning behind the mathematics, conceptually and procedurally. I personally enjoyed them. I like them, and they could be used in other areas, in other subject areas. And I even used this in my dissertation. This was a huge part of my dissertation. I have to write that on my list so I can share that as well. It was a huge part of my dissertation. And I remember even when I went to go back and work at the district office, people would have these posters hanging up, but no one really used them. And then they kept wondering why the mathematics scores weren't increasing. Certain things are in place for a reason. All right, so then I talked about a standard task. So it says -3 is greater than -7. And then I said, so how does this relate to the standard I showed you before with numbers and operations in base 10? Understand ordering and absolute value of rational numbers. Then I said, write, interpret, and explain statements of order for rational numbers in real world context. And you see, this is number sense in 6th grade. And then the standard for number 7, and then part B. So again, understanding the task. So this one wasn't related to the example, but it shows the example of how you read the actual standard. So this was big, the trajectory. I was big on learning trajectories, like looking at one single concept from like kindergarten all the way to 12th grade or wherever it may have started, and understanding the evolution of that concept. And it's like, oh, you don't understand this in 8th grade because you missed this gap in 4th grade. You were supposed to learn this, and this is why you don't know that. But this one is the standards for mathematical practice trajectory. And since the example I gave you before was rational numbers, we get people all the time talking about, why do I need math, and why this, why that? My thoughts have changed since then. I understand that question better now. But back then I was telling everybody should love math, right? So why are rational numbers important? And I wrote, in grade 6, students learn to locate rational numbers on the number line. In grade 7, they extend their understanding of operations with fractions to operations with rational numbers. In grade 8, students need to know that there are numbers that are not rational, and approximate them by rational numbers. Again, I was focused on, at the time, I mean, before I went to get my doctorate degree, I was the instructional coach of a mathematics department. I think I had like 17 teachers under me that I worked with. And I got tired of hearing, well, the students don't know this, students don't know that. And I remember my first 2 years of teaching, I used to use that excuse, and then my principal had to get me together. And it was like, well, between August and whenever now school gets out, your job is to get the students to know that. So I will work with my teachers like, let's not write these students off. We have to figure out the missing gap. And you do that with learning trajectories. So I said, can you think of an appropriate practice to use? This one, because I think we were still kind of new around understanding the mathematical practices. Some people were trying to just do them like a checklist, get all 8 in. I was like, that's not how it's supposed to go. So this one was to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. What that means is, before we just jump in and attack a problem, we have to take a step back and look at it and say, does this make sense? Can this even be solved? What are the components that's listed out there? What is this really asking me to do, and understanding the ins and outs of the problem? The perseverance part is, if you get stuck, do you just give up, or do you have another way to approach the problem? And again, you can apply all of these to life lessons. So then I said it was MP1 or SMP1, apply and extend previous understanding of numbers to the system of rational numbers. Then I said use positive and negative numbers to represent quantities in real world context, explaining the meaning of zero in each situation. Then I said extend number line diagrams and coordinate axes familiar from previous grades to represent points on the line and in the plane with negative number coordinates. And then finally, I said interpret statements of inequality as statements about the relative position of two numbers on a number line diagram. Now, if you're not in mathematics and that went over your head, just think about this. All it was is using prior knowledge, and you not just having the prior knowledge in your head, but getting that prior knowledge out on paper and really looking at, what do you already know about rational numbers? Do you look at them as negative numbers? What do you know about inequality? So really breaking up that one little problem where it was -3 is greater than -7. What is everything you know about that? Dump it out on the paper. I don't care if you learned it in 6th grade and you're in 9th grade. What do you already know? So that is what all of those words were. And again, you can apply that to anything. When we look at a question, we may not know the answer. It was like, what do you already know? You have to know something, because you're not a blank slate. So then, what is this? Oh, so then I go and explain why we need to use the SMPs, or the standards for mathematical practice. And this is, again, SMP1. Mathematically proficient students can explain correspondences between equations, verbal descriptions, tables, and graphs, or draw diagrams of important features and relationships, graph data, and search for regularity or trends. Now, you may be thinking like, oh my gosh, that is a lot for a student to do. At the time, I was focusing on the educators, the teachers, and the leaders, because it's like, how are we expecting students to know how to do something when the person that's in charge of the room, they're not doing this? And that became a big thorn in my side. So if you look at this, and I'm not gonna, this is my, I don't even know if I went this deep back then, but everything that's listed in there, verbal descriptions, tables, charts, all of that, the students needed to interact with the content like that. Not just solving the problem or not just giving the answer. They needed to see all of this representation for them to understand that one little concept. People may say that's overkill, but that's teaching and learning and understanding concepts both procedurally and conceptually. And then again, the other ones, younger students might rely on using concrete objects or pictures to help conceptualize or solve a problem. So the standards for mathematical practices, they show what students should look like, I think, in elementary, middle, and high school. Back then they would break them up, so you'll see like what should these students be doing in the classrooms at this level. The other part says mathematically proficient students check their answers to problems using a different method, and they continually ask themselves, does this make sense? They can understand the approaches of others to solving complex problems and identify correspondence between different approaches. A lot of times you've seen this. Look, the kid give the answer, you move on. If you've been in school as an adult, somebody give the answer and then move on. But to really be a true mathematician, or really to understand problem solving and critical thinking, it's like, okay, I got the answer, but can it be solved another way? Or does this make sense? Was this just a fluke? Because sometimes you can do, some magic and you get the answer, but then it's like, well, can I do it again with a different problem? So this doesn't happen. Well, back then, this wasn't happening a lot in classrooms. It was like, get the answer and keep it moving. So then I wanted people to understand that the Common Core, or not really the Common Core, because I didn't have any feelings about the Common Core, because I do believe in standards. Like, how are you going to measure like where you're going if you don't have these benchmarks in place? So how the Common Core was used at the time, I get it, but overall as the standards, I didn't have a problem. I had a problem where people when they were not using the mathematical practices and then wanted to complain about the structure of the Common Core state standards. So I went in and said that these standards do not dictate curriculum or teaching methods. For example, just because topic A appears before topic B in the standards for a given grade, it does not necessarily mean that topic A must be taught before topic B. A teacher may prefer to teach topic B before topic A, or might choose to highlight connections by teaching topic A and topic B at the same time. Or a teacher might prefer to teach a topic of his or own choosing that leads as a byproduct to students reaching the standards of topics A and B. In general, what it's saying is teacher autonomy. The teacher is supposed to be the expert in the classroom. And if they truly understood the mathematics, or insert whatever content, but if they truly understood mathematics in and out, how they should or supposed to, then they don't have to follow the set curriculum. The goal is to make sure that students are understanding the problems, and however the teacher needs to get them there, as long as they're engaged in critical thinking, problem solving, then it is what it is. A lot of times when I talked about the pacing guide earlier, a lot of leaders, principals, assistant principals, district leaders, whomever, they will use that as gospel, or you must do this. And so teachers were like, okay, you want me to follow this, but I've been doing this for a minute, and this group of students I have, they would benefit better if I did it out of order, because the teachers are the experts. And then it would cause a big rift, and it was like, no, you're behind, you can do this. It was a mess. But if people, and this is, I think I was a little rebel back then when I was in the classroom, because even before I understood, understanding research and backing up your information, I followed these scripts and these standards. So when I did anything out of order and someone would say, well, that's not how you're supposed to do it, I knew what to fall back on. Like, they weren't going to argue with the national document. And that's why it's important. That's why I labeled this curriculum content knowledge. It's important to know why you're doing what you're doing and be able to explain, articulate that to the higher ups. All right, so task 3, the same one, -3 is greater than -7. I said write it as an example using degrees. -3 degrees is greater than -7 degrees to express the fact that -3 degrees Celsius is warmer than -7 degrees Celsius. And then for more context, for example, for an account balance of -$30, you write the absolute value of -30 equals 30 to describe the size of the debt in dollars. I showed the example of a coordinate grid. There are some more examples of, it says, what about my instructional focus calendar and other evaluation components? That's the example I gave you, where some teachers were like, I hear what you're saying, but. So I said, here are some ways you can do this. Whole class interactive introduction. Explain to the class that in the lesson they will be working In the lesson, they'll be working with positive and negative numbers in the context of temperatures in degrees Celsius. This other thing that they can do is collaborate or do individual work. So find out about students' work, support student reasoning, and then sharing and clarifying. Again, with the graphics. So I used to go and look for additional resources. I wasn't making up a lot of stuff. Like, no, we're going to use what is already out here by some reputable sources and things like that. So I found the Mathematics Assessment Project. I don't even know if this is still in operation, to tell you the truth, but it was a phenomenal resource at the time. And then, so here, I remember this was the time with the shifting of the curriculum. It was like, is this good book just because somebody slapped Common Core on it, or just because someone said this program is good, or this set of materials is good? Is it really? So I wanted the teachers to stop placing blame on the administrators, and then I wanted the administrators to allow teachers to have a voice into making the choice of the materials, because you as a leader may have wanted to save money, or you may have gotten a good deal, or someone said this is what you should use, but you're not teaching it. Your classroom teachers are teaching that material, so why wouldn't they have a say so on what to use and what not to use? So the questions I said for them to ask themselves: what standards should I be focusing on? How can I use the surrounding sections of the teacher edition to develop tasks that will lead to conceptual understanding? Can I identify an S&P or a standard for mathematical practice that applies to my standard over time? So when they were going through the resources, or either new or old, these were just some guiding questions to see if they were on the right track, to see if those materials were good enough for them, or see if those were high quality materials. I don't want to say good enough, but sometimes, you get what you get and then you have to make it better. But looking at it to make sure that it was high quality work. So then I said, to become critical consumers of curriculum materials, ask yourself, am I able to provide a justification for how the task or activity will facilitate student engagement with the chosen standard for mathematical practice? Can I clearly describe the modification? So again, looking at the material that you already have, essentially what this is saying, does it go beyond just the computation? Does it support students' thinking, reasoning, and does it help you as the educator to get the students? Because while you're also learning as well, so you want to make sure that your curriculum or whatever resources you were using was able to give you the support that you needed. So these were the references that I used. So that's what I want to share with you. I hope, let me see if I can stop share and come back to you. So I know that may have sounded like it was boring or information overload, but I wanted to share that this is still relevant to this day. Although I'm not a classroom teacher, I still use that knowledge of understanding curriculum and having the curriculum content knowledge to decipher what information I'm going to use. If it's beneficial for me, is it beneficial for my students when I was a college professor? Is it beneficial for my coaching clients and even my consulting clients? And I want to empower you, even if you are a classroom teacher or an administrator or someone else who has to look at materials, don't just take it at face value. Delve deep into that information. You know your industry. This was all about mathematics, but you know your industry. You know what your people need. Go do your due diligence and research the information, and then come back and look at the material and say, okay, can this get my people from A to B to C and to D? Will they have this transformation in their learning experience, whether it's a traditional K-12 student or whether it's an adult learner and all those in between. So that's all I wanted to share with you. This was fun, taking a trip back to memory lane. I was really big, again, on standards and procedures and looking at how documents worked. And it was a lot of behind the scenes. And mathematics was so much deeper than writing some problems on the board. We talk about the art and science of teaching. This was kind of that for me. And I had no idea back then when I was a classroom teacher how it was going to serve me in my doctoral program. So I presented this entire presentation at the Florida Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and it was well received at that point. The only thing I wish I would have done was to do a recording like this, have it accessible for people, because people can take your PowerPoints and they're like, oh yeah, but then one, they never use it. Or two, if they do use it, they don't know all of the in-between things in there. So it's like they're just taking back pieces of paper. And it would have been beneficial to say, hey, go check out my YouTube channel at the time, if you want an in-depth discussion, or if you want a replay of what we did at the conference, right? So I'm challenging you, if you are watching this, go back and look at your CV or your resume or some presentations, and I want you to record something and share it out to the world, because you never know who's going to need the information that you used to use. They may need it for today. All right, so I am Dr. V. Thank you so much for listening and learning with me and taking this trip down through memory lane. And I want you to remember this: to be well, to be empowered, to be bold, and to be brilliant. Until next time, bye.